Darren Payne might be on his way out of Washington. Peters is reportedly shopping him, but there's a real problem with the offer on the table, and I'll break it down in a minute. McLaurin says Diggs is huge for this offense, but Diggs already said in his heart he's still WR1, and that tension's about to blow up. Rappaport confirmed Armstrong is out for the opener against Philly, no pay, and for a reason nobody wants to say out loud, raise hail. Let's work through this one with real numbers, because this story invites lazy speculation and I don't want to do that here. Darren Payne signed a 4-year, $90 million extension before the 2023 season. That deal hits its final year in 2026, and his cap hit this season sits at $27.95 million, according to Spotrac. To put that in perspective, that's more than starting offensive tackle Sam Cosmi makes, and it's by far the highest number on Washington's entire roster. Nearly 10% of the team's cap tied up in one player who, being honest, hasn't been the 2022 version of Payne since that 11.5 sack season. That's the real problem here. Since that 2022 peak, Payne hasn't topped 4 sacks in any of the last 3 seasons. In 2025, he finished with just 8 quarterback hits across the entire year, and it's not that the guy suddenly got bad overnight, it's that they moved him off the left side of the nose tackle spot where he exploded in 2022 back to the right side where his production fell off a cliff. That's a technical detail almost nobody brings up when they talk about Payne, and to me it's central. He lost the exact scheme spot where he was lethal, well beyond whatever natural decline comes with age. Now, why does this become a real trade conversation instead of January speculation? Because ESPN's John Keim reported that Adam Peters isn't planning to negotiate an extension with Payne until after the 2026 season wraps. Translated out of general manager corporate speak, that means one thing. Peters wants to see what Payne does under new defensive coordinator Durante Jones before committing another dollar, and if Payne doesn't respond, the most logical financial exit is letting him walk in free agency, or better yet, for the roster, moving him before that happens and extracting some value. Bleacher Report calculated that trading Payne would save Washington $16.8 million in cap space. And that number feels like the key to this whole debate, man, because the Commanders don't have a 2nd or 4th round pick in the 2026 draft. They handed those picks over for Marshawn Lattimore, Deebo Samuel, and Laramie Tunsil. Peters has been spending future draft capital to compete right now, and at some point that future capital has to get replenished. Selling Payne for picks is exactly the kind of move a GM who's already spent too much has to start considering. And here's where it gets interesting. There are real teams interested. Athlon Sports reported that the Cincinnati Bengals, who already brought in Dexter Lawrence from the Giants, are looking to reinforce their defensive line after losing Trey Hendrickson and could offer a 2027 5th or 6th round pick plus safety Brian Cook in exchange for Payne. Honestly, that offer doesn't move me at all. A late 2027 pick and a secondary safety isn't enough compensation for a defensive tackle who, under the right conditions, can still generate interior pressure in a league where that's genuinely scarce. The Raiders get mentioned too, mostly because they're deep in a rebuild and need any veteran presence they can find on the market. And the Bears, who would reunite Payne with his old line mate Montez Sweat, who left Washington a couple seasons back. That reunion sounds nice on social media, I'll admit that, but neither of these situations has an actual offer on the table yet. These are names floating around, not negotiations. My personal take, and I want to be direct here, is that Payne finishes the 2026 season in Washington. Not because Peters wants to pay him an extension, but because none of the offers circulating right now justify giving up your best interior presence before you even know if Durante Jones' scheme revives him. Jer'Jan Newton, the young defensive lineman Washington is developing, still isn't ready to fully take over Payne's role anchoring the interior. If they move him in October for a 4th round pick because someone sweetens the offer, I'd understand that completely. But moving him now, in August, for what's currently on the table, would be giving away production this roster still needs while it's competing for a playoff spot. What does worry me, and I'll be honest about this, is that if Payne starts the season the way he started 2023, 2024, and 2025, no real explosion, quiet numbers, the pressure to sell him at the October trade deadline is going to be enormous. And at that point, yeah, I think Peters pulls the trigger. This $90 million contract is turning into the symbol of an aggressive spending era that's eventually going to need to balance itself out. The question isn't whether Payne leaves Washington, it's when. And I want to add something almost nobody's putting into this conversation: the emotional factor. Payne came into Washington in the 2018 draft, same class as Jonathan Allen. He's one of the few players who lived through the entire Dan Snyder era, the painful transition, and now the rebuild under Josh Harris. That kind of continuity carries a value that never shows up on a spot rack spreadsheet. When a fan sees Payne on the field, they're still seeing the last piece of a defense that in 2022 scared every offense in the NFC East. Losing him, even for purely financial and scheme reasons, is going to feel like closing a chapter. As a fan, that weighs on me. As an analyst who has to be honest with you, I know the business of football doesn't wait around for feelings to settle. I also want to add some historical context here because it helps explain why Peters is moving with this kind of caution. The same front office that extended Payne for $90 million also let Jonathan Allen go in a cap move last year, and Allen ended up signing in Minnesota for a much smaller deal than a lot of people expected. That tells Peters something. The market for veteran defensive tackles with declining production isn't as generous as it looks on paper. If Washington's expecting a second-round offer for Payne, they're probably going to be disappointed. Market reality, not nostalgia, is what's going to define this chapter, and watch for this too. If Durante Jones manages to pull a version closer to the 2022 Payne, even halfway there, Payne becomes the single most valuable trade chip Washington has heading into the October deadline. That's where Peters really wins. Let the player's value climb by playing well through the first few weeks, then sell him to the highest bidder once contending teams start getting desperate for defensive line reinforcements before the trade window closes. To me, that's the masterstroke a smart GM executes, and Peters has shown up to now that he's exactly that kind of operator. Okay, I needed to move from something heavy into something that gets me genuinely excited though, fam. This one has its own layer of tension. Almost nobody's calling out with the honesty I want to bring today. This morning, Terry McLaurin talked to reporters in Ashburn and dropped a line that's already circulating. Quote, "With me and Diggs, adding Diggs was huge for us. We're just looking forward to being weapons for Jaden." End quote. That line, reported by Hogs Haven, is exactly the kind of statement a locker room captain is supposed to give in public. Positive, team first, collaborative, and I don't doubt for a second that McLaurin means it. The guy's been the only reliable constant at that position since 2019, and after a 2025 season marked by a quad strain and an ankle sprain that kept him under 1,000 yards for the first time since his rookie year, McLaurin needs this offense to click as much as anybody. But here's what I want the community to really understand. Diggs didn't come to Washington to play quiet second fiddle. On August 7th, in his first press availability after a camp practice, a reporter asked him about an earlier statement where he'd called himself the best number 2 receiver in the entire league. And instead of softening that comment, Diggs doubled down on it with an honesty that I, as an analyst, absolutely love to hear. He said, quote, "In this job, you gotta exude confidence. You know what I'm saying? I said 2 on camera, but in my heart, you know I'm gonna say 1. End quote. Let that sit for a second. A 4-time Pro Bowler, 32 years old, freshly arrived to a team that already has an established receiver on a $97 million contract, comes out and publicly says that deep down he still sees himself as the WR1. That's not a casual comment, that's a player marking territory, and I get it completely. Man, Diggs signed a 1-year, $12 million deal. That kind of short contract doesn't belong to a guy showing up to warm the bench. It belongs to someone who wants to put up huge numbers this year to lock in his next contract, whether that's in Washington or somewhere else. And to hit those numbers, he needs target share. He needs first read routes. He needs Jaden Daniels looking his way as often as he looks McLaurin's way. Now, is this a locker room problem? My opinion, and I could be wrong here, is no, as long as Dan Quinn and new offensive coordinator David Blau know how to design a scheme where both guys get real volume without stepping on each other. McLaurin remains the number 1 receiver on the depth chart. That hasn't changed with the Diggs signing. Any depth chart projection you check confirms that. But Diggs is coming off a Patriots season where, by his own account, he was the 14th ranked receiver in the entire league, playing just 52% of the snaps. Give that same player 70-75% of the snaps in an offense with a mobile quarterback creating extra windows like Jaden Daniels, and Diggs' numbers can jump easily. What actually worries me, and I say this with the responsibility of someone who's watched this movie before with other teams, is what happens the first Sunday Diggs gets 4 targets and McLaurin gets 12. That's when, in my heart, I'm the one stops being a charismatic press conference line and starts turning into real friction inside the locker room. Terry McLaurin has the maturity and the leadership to handle that. He proved it during last year's holdout, negotiated with class, and came back the exact same professional he's always been. The question is whether Diggs, who's got a history of friction in Buffalo and in Houston, has that same patience. I believe, and this is my personal prediction with a date attached, that by week 5 of the regular season, we're going to have a clear answer. If Diggs is comfortable with 15-16 targets a week, this duo turns into one of the best in the country. If he starts hinting in interviews that he needs more involvement, that's when I sound the alarm. For now, keep it in your back pocket because this 2 number 1s sharing a receiver room story is going to be one of the most debated topics on this channel all through August. There's another angle here I want to develop because I think it's getting way too little attention, the effect this dynamic has on the rest of the receiver room. Antonio Williams, last year's 3rd round pick, and Jalen Lane had both been mentioned as guys with a real shot to take a leap in year 2. If McLaurin and Diggs soak up most of the first and second read targets, those young guys get pushed into rotation roles, and that directly affects the long-term development of the position. ESPN's John Keim had already written that the wide receiver battle was one of the most compelling storylines of camp, precisely because there's so much competition for a handful of spots. Diggs' arrival doesn't solve that competition, it intensifies it, because now there's a bigger name soaking up snaps that might otherwise have gone to the young guys. Personally, as someone who's followed this receiver room player by player since the draft, I think this ends up being a good thing in the medium term, even if it stings right now. An offense with McLaurin, Diggs, and Jaden Daniels competing for a playoff spot doesn't have time to wait for a rookie or a second-year guy to develop at their own pace. It needs production now. Antonio Williams and Jalen Lane are going to have to earn every snap in camp and preseason, and that worst-case scenario is exactly the kind of pressure that separates role players from future starters. If either one responds under that pressure, this roster wins on both ends. It wins now with 2 elite veteran receivers, and it wins down the road with young guys forged in real competition, not handed free reps. And to close things out, a story that dropped yesterday afternoon that honestly caught me off guard. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport reported that Dorrance Armstrong has been suspended without pay for Washington's regular season opener for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. The suspension starts August 30th, and Armstrong becomes eligible to return September 14th. That means the edge rusher misses the opening game against Philadelphia of all teams, the same rival that knocked the Commanders out in the conference championship last season. The financial hit is real too. Armstrong loses $507,500 in salary and bonus money for this single week, and this news lands in the final year of a 3-year, $33 million contract, which adds another layer of pressure, because this was already an important contract year for him, and now it starts with a stumble before he plays a single official down. We don't, and I want to be honest with you here, have the specific details of what the violation actually was. The league doesn't always release that information right away, and I'm not going to speculate with accusations I can't back up with a solid source. What we do know, with a name and a reporter behind it, is the football consequence. 1 game gone against a division rival in the most important early game on the calendar. My take on this is simple, and it might sound a little different than what you hear on other channels. Football-wise, this hurts, but it's not catastrophic. Armstrong is coming off a limited 2025 season. He appeared in just 7 games because of an injury that landed him on injured reserve and finished with 24 tackles and 5.5 sacks in that shortened stretch. Washington already invested in defensive line depth this offseason. 1 game without Armstrong shouldn't derail the game plan against Philadelphia, even though it clearly costs the team an experienced body right when you want your unit at its sharpest. What matters more to me as a fan and as an analyst on this channel is the pattern. This same training camp, we already saw tight ends Coach Ben Steele get let go following a DUI arrest. Now a personal conduct suspension for a starting defensive player. Dan Quinn spent a good chunk of last year talking about culture, about discipline, about rebuilding this franchise's identity after the Snyder era, and these two episodes in the same camp put that narrative under an uncomfortable spotlight. I'm not saying Quinn's lost control of the locker room, not at all, but I am saying these two situations together deserve someone in this city asking that question out loud at the next press conference. Armstrong returns September 14th. And by that point, Washington will have already played its first regular season game. He'll have to earn his spot back in the pass rush rotation, which, knowing his track record, shouldn't be a technical problem. The problem, if there is one, is about trust, and that gets rebuilt game by game, not with a press release. I also want to talk about the pure tactical impact of this absence, because I think it's being a little underrated. Against Philadelphia, Washington is going to need every ounce of pass rush pressure it can find, because the Eagles' offensive line remains one of the best in the entire league, with Lane Johnson still protecting the right side the way he has for more than a decade now. Without Armstrong in game 1, the responsibility for generating outside pressure falls heavier on Kelevon Chaisson and Odaf Owe, two free agency additions who haven't played a single official down with this defense yet. That's a real risk, not a footnote. Durante Jones is going to have to design extra blitz packages or interior pressure looks to make up for it, and in an open division road game with this much preseason hype behind it, that's not a minor adjustment. Now, here's the other side of the coin, and I want to say this clearly too. On a roster that's genuinely competing for a division title, suspensions like this need to carry real consequences inside the locker room, beyond whatever the league hands down. Dan Quinn has built a reputation rightfully as a coach who's close to his players, almost paternal in how he leads. But closeness can't mean tolerance. If Washington wants to be a January team, a playoff team, a real contender, internal discipline has to be just as strong as the scouting department or the play design. That's a line Quinn's gonna have to walk carefully over the next few weeks. And how he handles this publicly at the next press conference is going to tell me a lot about where this team's culture is headed in year 3 under his leadership. And that wraps today's video, fam. 3 stories that each in their own way define exactly where this franchise stands right now in August 2026. A $90 million contract that could become the first major move of the trade deadline. 2-star receivers who complement each other on paper and who, in practice, are going to have to work out, game by game, who's actually first in line. And a key defender missing the most important opener on the calendar, not because of injury, but because of a decision we still don't fully understand. I still believe in this roster, and I'm saying that with my eyes wide open, not with blind fan goggles on. Jaden Daniels enters year 3 with more weapons around him than at any other point in his pro career. The defense, beyond Payne and Armstrong, still has young pieces genuinely hungry to prove something. And this city, this whole DMV, deserves to watch this team fight in January again. Tell me in the comments which of these 3 stories worries you the most. Does Payne get traded or does he stay? Do Diggs and McLaurin coexist without friction, or does this blow up by week 5? I want to read every single answer, seriously. If this video helped you out, hit that like button, subscribe, tap the bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Burgundy and gold, always.